Christina is a freelance writer and speaker. She has a radio program on Radio Maria, which I believe is hosted across 162 countries. So Christina is a gift to us at this conference from Perusian Media, who have a touring Australia. And she speaks on this program under the title of Embracing Your Greatness.
One of the things that we understand as a result of original sin is that through original sin, there is a brokenness that took place, first of all, between the angels, yes? So we have disorder that took place between the angels, the brokenness, the fallen nature then that took place from Satan giving his no to God. And we see the brokenness in the world with the environment. We see it within our very selves, within the people and relationship in our lives. And so it really has just kind of become the state of our culture as of right now. There's this brokenness of understanding who God is. And I believe that one of the things theology of the body is set to do for us is to really help bring in a healing and a redemption to understanding who we are as male and female, and healing a part of our sexuality, of what that means, how it's lived out, how it's expressed and shared with others. So my background with theology of the body began in 2000. I had begun writing for several magazines. I was in traveling and speaking. I worked with Catholic Answers for about 10 years. It's a large Catholic apostolate on the west coast of the United States. And I had a copy of Theology of the Body, and I was attempting to read it, and I say attempting because it's a very dense book. And in my opinion, Pope John Paul was not just a scholar and a philosopher and a theologian, but I think he might have also been a mystic as well. And his meditations really go deep in asking a question about things that I had never really ever thought about before. So when I began reading Theology of the Body, it was mostly just to educate myself on a subject so I could start speaking and sharing and have conversations with my fellow speakers and writers in this religious realm at the time that I was trying to just keep it in my head. I was not thinking about it transforming me or affecting me in any personal way. At this time in my life, and I feel that this is what happens with so many people that I have encountered, is that at this time I was seeing religion just as a means to use as a tool to earn something, to gain something, to educate myself, or to prove how smart I was, or to prove my worthiness, or to kind of earn God's favor in my life, so that God would see me as good and so that he would love me. I still had not had any real deep encounter or personal experience with God in my faith. And I really believe that obviously has to be the key. So I knew a lot of things about religion, but I did not know God as a person in an intimate relationship with me. So I'm a lover of stories. Each and every one of us have a story, and it's very important. I believe that in sharing our story, that we enter more intimately into relationship with one another and the divine life of the Trinity. So I'd like to just share a little bit about how my particular story with Theology of the Body has brought healing to some very deep woundedness regarding my identity, my value, and my worthiness. And my hope is that you might be encouraged or even inspired to enter more deeply into the meditations of Theology of the Body to discover what God desires for you to know about your own worthiness, and how he desires a relationship with each and every one of you, and possibly to set you free some of the lies that you might believe, or bondage that could be preventing you from receiving the love of your spouse or people in your lives, or to transform you more perfectly from one glory to another. So grace perfects our nature, and I pray that through some of what we're going to talk about today, that becomes true for you as well. So as I had stated before, Pope Benedict has wrote in Jesus of Nazareth, he said, healing is an essential dimension of the apostolic mission and of Christianity. And when understood at a sufficiently deep level, this expresses the entire content of redemption. So you see, if we don't address a healing, as I talked about in kind of the intro statement, then we kind of leak like a sieve. The healing that I'm talking about is that we need to address some of the ways in which we're not able to receive Christ's love or truth or one another. Do you guys have the movie here, Princess Bride? Have you seen The Princess Bride? One of my favorite lines in this movie, Princess Bride, is "Life is pain, Highness. Anyone trying to tell you different is trying to sell you something." And the reason why that sticks out to me is that is so true. And there is no love without suffering. And so understanding that is what I think uniquely sets us apart as Catholic Christians. There's so many beautiful Christian speakers out there that I absolutely love listening to. But one of the things that abundantly falls short as I listen to them is that there isn't the value of suffering. It's more kind of like if you're not totally set free and joyful, then perhaps you're not doing this right. So it becomes this message of just happiness and great, wonderful glory. And you see, we can get in this position of feeling like, well, what am I doing wrong that there's so much suffering or that this is so difficult? And that's where we make the mistake, is the suffering is part of refining us, but we can endure that suffering, and that suffering can become beautiful when it becomes purposeful, when it's united to Christ's suffering. And Lent, what better time for us to have this conversation? So as Pope Benedict attests, healing is essential to our Christian faith. And as Christians, we believe that Jesus came to earth for this very purpose, to restore us to wholeness and to bring us back into full communion with the Father and with each other. So what's stopping us? Why are so many people lost and hurting or confused or simply unable to enter into this vision of human love that our Creator has called all of us to? Well, I believe it's because this vision has become harder and harder to see and understand in the world. It's been hard to see this goodness in our world today. When it comes to our identities, many of us have a disordered identity of our bodies. Raise your hand if you're very happy with your body. Okay. So many of us have a hard time even seeing the beauty of our own bodies. And it's caused us to believe that either our brokenness or the places that we fall short or have a shame, that's the whole concept of naked without shame, but that we are naked with shame, is that we begin to hide ourselves from one another. This is theology of the body, talking about the irony of the fact that each of us long to be intimately seen. See me, see my heart. But yet we covered ourselves with a fig leaf. We were naked with that shame, but what we all deeply long to be is seen deeply and seen, encountered, to know our hearts, to know my mind, to know my love, my intentions. And yet many of us are confused as to even who God is, of whether we can even trust him. We're confused about who we are, and some of us are confused about even our own sexuality. All of these questions are being asked today, and so where does theology of the body come in? I believe that theology of the body is a healing ointment in a very broken and hurting world, where many of us, not all, but many are confused about who we are and why we're here. And in this confusion comes this beautiful and compelling biblical response to the sexual revolution. But not in that it wants to demonstrate immorality or have a legalistic discussion, but instead it is the liberty of teaching that helps to set us free when we receive this vision of human love in the overall divine plan of our Creator.
Christina, Theology of the Body by St. John Paul II is an incredibly important text for both Christians and non-Christians alike. How did Theology of the Body impact your life? Why is it important for you to share St. John Paul II's teachings on this topic with others?
Well, I would say I'm definitely a victim of our culture. I'm somebody that grew up in a very sexualized culture, and I didn't understand the purpose that our body played in my own salvation, much less how I was supposed to live out my life. And so I, like many people, had so much woundedness. I didn't understand the purpose of my body or what love really meant, or that God had a plan for my life. And so what Theology of the Body did is, I think it gave me a beautiful language of understanding the biblical meaning of why I was created female, and what that meant and how I was supposed to live that out. And I think it enabled me to learn to actually love the people in my life better and to be loved by the people in my life better. So God wants us to know him. To know something means more than to intellectually understand something. It means intimacy of experience. This is where the body comes in. So our bodies experience the world around us. We have the senses of the body. We see, we hear, we smell, we touch, we taste. We have this bodily encounter of which we gain information about the world around us, and we experience this through our bodies. It's how we get to know something. The Catholic faith has always been a very sensual faith. What I mean by that is that all of our senses are engaged when we're practicing it. We see the white clothes when we wear First Communion or on a wedding day. We hear the words, "I absolve you," in the confessional. We smell the incense as it burns, reminding us of our prayers going to heaven. We taste the body and blood of Christ. We experience the touching of ointment on our bodies in baptism, holy orders, and confirmation. So we come to know God in and through the sacraments, which are these outward signs that our bodies receive, but our soul is receiving this spiritual grace. So the sacraments are this physical and spiritual reality. And so the church has always talked about this, but for some reason the world has somehow lost sight of the importance of the body. They want to throw the body out and say body bad and the spiritual is somehow good and holy. And we're forgetting that God, in his goodness, came to redeem even the body. This is a hyper spirituality if the body's bad and all spiritual things are good. So there seems to be a rejection of sometimes spiritual realities as well. And Theology of the Body comes to remind us of the truth, which is the union of spiritual and the physical. So in Theology of the Body, 19:4, it says the body, and in fact only the body, is capable of making visible what is invisible, the spiritual and the divine. It has been created to transfer into a visible reality of the world the mystery hidden from all eternity in God, and us to be a sign of it. So the childhood taunts of sticks and stones will break my bones. Have you heard this before? But words won't hurt me is actually false. Because if something is experienced by our body, then our very personhood has experienced it. And that experience will affect our emotions, it will affect our intellect, it will affect our soul. This is what it means to be human beings. And we must see ourselves as a whole person if we truly want to embrace what Theology of the Body is teaching and embrace our greatness, which is the dignity that God himself has infused and given to each one of us at the moment of conception. If we're to know who we are in and through our bodies, then the first lesson that I learned was that I was an object to be used. And in that time, it was Karol Wojtyła in Love and Responsibility. He taught in that, which is part of the concept of Theology of the Body, that the opposite of love is not hate, it's use. To use something as an object. And many persons, and I talk about this in the talks that I give. As a matter of fact, I have a degree in psychology. I have graduate work in family and individual counseling. And one of the chapters in my book, Embracing Your Greatness, is I go through borderline personality disorder using the DSM-4 at the time diagnostic criteria for that personality disorder. I go through the diagnostic criteria and I show you how many of the criterias for some of the psychological illnesses, the emotional problems that people are suffering with today are really deep-seated identity wounds. Wounds where they don't understand or know. It's self-protecting mechanisms that have come to protect, to self-protect, or to survive from neglect or from trauma or for the difficulties that people have grown up in. And so we stop seeing people as persons and instead give them a diagnosis. Theology of the body is telling us that you cannot separate out a diagnosis. You have to look at the entire person and realize that if somebody goes through something traumatic, through the body, it is going to affect the entire personhood because of the sacredness of the body. So if we think that if we know that the opposite of love is to use someone, it gives us a beautiful dialogue for us to then have this conversation. When we enter into a world that says, well, I just want to be loved. Well, what does that mean? Because I love pizza, but I don't want to be married to pizza. So we need, and we used to use different words, eros and agape and phileo and these loves, but we don't talk like that anymore. But we have to understand that the world has a different language, and theology of the body is giving us a dialogue and a means of which to enter into a beautiful conversation of what is true and what is good and what is beautiful. So ironically, Pope John Paul II, he identified, the opposite in that love and responsibility. But like many persons who experienced abuse, neglect, and trauma, my self-worth and my self-image was based on the experiences of my life. And the lessons that I learned was fear and shame, as well as the belief that I was not loved and I was not wanted. So this is where theology of the body brings this healing truth to know. So what it means to be male and female is essential to understanding who we are as persons. And through our femininity or our masculinity, we can learn what that meaning of love and communion of persons is. So like, for instance, through theology of the body, a quick lesson, if we're going to just look at the physical anatomy of male and female, the very anatomy that reveals to the world in my physical body that I am a woman is not just my chromosomes of the XY chromosome, but it's also the ability to bring life into the world, my womb, which is on the inside of my body. So if the body makes visible the invisible reality, what does my body reveal to the world about what it means to be a woman? It means that I am called to open and receive. That there is a spiritual reality to being a woman that written like an icon into my body is a receptivity to the spiritual revealed through the physical fact that my body is called to receive life, to conceive it within me, and to birth it into the world. So all of us as church, bride, are called to that, but women particularly have a spiritual receptivity that sets them apart because it's written in my body and I make that visible to the world, a call to open, to receive, to conceive, and to bring forth something with life. So if you look at a man's body, the part that reveals he's man is on the outside of his body. And that shows he's called to be the initiator of the gift. He's called to give himself to the other, that the two should become one flesh. In fact, if you look at the Old Testament, for instance, that God entered into covenant relationship between man and woman through that very place on his body that revealed to the world the foreshadowing of the bridegroom, that part that made him male, the shedding of blood, as if to say and reveal to the world that you are called to be the bridegroom to the point of shedding blood for your bride, which of course prefigured Christ, of showing that through circumcision, the entering into covenant relationship with God. So that became apparent in New Covenant through women, and I don't know if you know this. This is deep teachings of theology body. I'm just pulling little things out, but the speculation then is the hymen, so that when the two become one flesh, that there still is blood shed in that act of coming together because our bodies are purposeful. We do know, for instance, that a marriage is not consummated until the act has occurred, yes? So this physical act itself is important, that God desires for us to be engaging in and entering into the act of physical intimacy because our bodies are speaking a language, and just as every single sacrament that the Catholic Church has that we can re-participate in to receive sanctifying grace, so too does marriage. When I come into a church, I can renew my baptismal vows and I can bless myself with holy water, which is reminiscent of my baptism. I can go to confession. I can receive the body and blood of Christ. I have the anointing of the sick. When a priest is on the altar, he is entering back into the sacrament of his ordination as he stands on the altar and offers his holy sacrifice of the Mass. And so St. Thomas Aquinas wrote in the Summa that so too, when two people, married persons, both free from mortal sin, come together in the marriage embrace, it becomes a conduit of sanctifying grace for your soul, because it is your body renewing your wedding vow, saying, I give myself to you as a gift. I open or I initiate the gift. I give myself to you as a free, faithful, total, and fruitful gift of self, which can be very healing to hear, the purposefulness, which is one of the things we suffer from in the world, yes? A division of what the act itself and dividing it and separating it from its purpose of unitive and procreative. So if we know who we are in and through our bodies, then we can recognize that when we separate these things out, we live in a very confusing world about what is love and what isn't love. And many persons don't understand what true love is or believe that it needs to be earned. Theology of the body teaches us that love is a total gift of itself to another without condition. And I was taught that love was selfish. I was taught that love was neglectful and couldn't be counted upon. But theology of the body teaches us that love is faithful. I was taught that my usefulness would determine my value and that could change on a dime. Where theology of the body teaches us that love is fruitful, I experienced spiritual loss of hope and trust or vulnerability or receptivity. And so I began to close my heart to the world. This is the state of the world today. There is an attack on the family and most certainly on our identities as male and female, because when you disorder or pervert our abilities to be a visible sign of God's love to the world, it is that then when people will stop believing in God and stop believing in purpose, and stop believing in the purpose of love. And this is where we see it taking on this disordered meaning of love.
Hello, my name is Father Dominic Murphy. I'm a Dominican. I live and work here in Sydney, and this is my second year as a parish priest, although I've been a priest for 20 years. So I'm just learning the ropes, and I heard about this conference on Renaissance of Marriage and was very attracted to the speakers. As a measure of what I've received, I've wanted to go to all the talks. They've all had really something that I think I want to get, and I've felt there's some very honest talking going on here about the whole busyness of trying to foster marriage and family life in a parish, but particularly our focus has been mainly on marriage, preparing couples, but also, thankfully and wisely, we're talking also about how the longevity of marriage, supporting.
The Renaissance of Marriage conference has been really helpful. There's a lot of leaders from around Australia that have come together to converge and discuss and listen to one another about the best ways to do marriage education at all different levels, from the child to adolescents to young adults to even after the wedding has happened. It's really, really important that all these people come together and share ideas, because this is a turning point in our culture in Australia and we need to address these issues. This place is basically a massive think tank for this weekend, and there's going to be a lot of fruit that's come out of this weekend. So it's a real privilege to be here.
Shalom World Television is coming to Australia. This is a great gift. It's been gifted to many parts of the world, and now it's our Australian turn to receive it with open arms. I welcome it, I bless it. It's going to really support family life, married life, youth, give us a resource that we know that we need really great help in these areas. May Almighty God bless this new resource coming to our land, in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Shalom World, God's own channel.